Welcome back to Phoenix Podcast, hosted by Amin Moanian. We deep dive into the philosophies and histories shaping the political and economic landscape. Have you ever wondered what the future holds for American politics?
It's a question a lot of people are asking.
Well, today we're going to try to do just that. We're diving into this fascinating document called Project 2025. It's a detailed blueprint for conservative policy in the U.S., crafted by the Heritage Foundation. It's a pretty prominent conservative think tank.
Yeah, they're a big deal in conservative circles. And this document's really intriguing. They've invested, well, a substantial sum. We're talking $22 million to lay out this roadmap. So it's not just some, casual proposal. This is a serious attempt to shape the future.
So Project 2025, it's structured around 10 key areas. They call these pillars. And they cover everything from how the government operates to how we approach education, energy, healthcare, even social issues.
And what's fascinating is how many of these proposals really echo ideas from classic liberalism. The philosophy that emphasizes individual liberty, limited government, free markets, individual responsibility. You can really see that thread running through a lot of these pillars.
Okay, so let's unpack these pillars one by one. The first one tackles governing the executive branch, aims to streamline government agencies, make them more efficient, potentially even eliminating some departments.
Right, and this aligns with the classic liberal idea of a smaller, less intrusive government. Think of it this way. They believe a streamlined government can actually encourage economic growth and foster individual initiative, rather than, stifling it with bureaucracy.
Interesting. So less red tape, more freedom for individuals and businesses.
Precisely. The second pillar, economic policies. This dives into the financial side of things. It focuses on tax reform, responsible fiscal policy, meaning being smart about government spending, deregulation, and reducing the national debt.
Sounds like a lot to tackle. What are some of the core ideas behind their approach?
Well, they draw heavily on principles from the Austrian School of Economics, which you might find interesting. This school of thought really stresses the importance of free markets and minimal government intervention in the economy. They argue that the market, driven by individual choices, is a much better regulator than any government policy could ever be.
So in a nutshell, they believe in letting the free market do its thing.
Exactly. They argue that excessive government involvement often leads to unintended consequences and can actually harm the economy more than it helps. So their approach is to trust the market to allocate resources and regulate itself. Now, moving on to the third pillar, education reform.
Yeah, this one seems to be generating a lot of buzz. Project 2025 advocates for greater parental rights in education, expanding school choice, and limiting the federal government's control over local schools.
Right, and this also ties back to the idea of decentralization, which is a key principle in both classic liberalism and the Austrian school. They're very wary of centralized planning, and they argue that it often leads to inefficiency and restricts individual choice. In this case, they're applying that principle to education. They believe that parents and local communities are much better equipped to make decisions about their children's education than some distant federal bureaucracy.
So it's about shifting power away from Washington and towards parents and local communities.
You got it. They believe this empowers parents and leads to a more responsive and effective education system.
Now, the next pillar, energy and environment, seems especially relevant in today's world. What's their stance on this?
Well, they push for energy independence, deregulation of fossil fuels, and a reevaluation of current environmental policies. It's a perspective that prioritizes domestic energy production and, potentially challenges some existing environmental regulations.
That's down to stir up some debate, especially with growing concerns about climate change.
Absolutely. This is where differing viewpoints and priorities really come into play, and it's something we'll definitely delve deeper into in our next segment, exploring the potential implications and the different perspectives surrounding this very important issue.
Sounds like a good place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground already, and I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear more about these proposals and how they might impact their lives.
Definitely. We'll be back soon to unpack the remaining pillars of Project 2025, examining their potential implications for American society and the future we might be heading towards.
Welcome back to Phoenix Podcast. We're in the middle of unpacking Project 2025, this fascinating blueprint for conservative policy in the U.S. Before the break, we were talking about the push for energy independence and deregulation in Project 2025. It's a hot-button issue, to say the least.
It is indeed. And, it really gets to the heart of the debate between economic growth and environmental protection. Proponents of Project 2025 argue that reducing regulations on fossil fuels would lower energy costs, boost domestic production, create jobs, strengthen the economy.
Well, that sounds appealing on the surface. But what about the potential environmental impact? I mean, aren't we already seeing the effects of climate change?
That's the crux of the matter, isn't it? Critics argue that deregulating fossil fuels would actually exacerbate climate change and harm public health, so they advocate for investing in renewable energy sources and stricter environmental regulations, even if it means, slightly higher costs in the short term.
So it's a classic trade-off, economic growth versus environmental protection.
Exactly, and it's a complex issue with no easy answers. Project 2025 clearly leans towards prioritizing economic growth, while others prioritize environmental sustainability. So it's a debate that's likely to continue for years to come.
Now let's move on to healthcare, another area where Project 2025 proposes significant changes. It favors market-based solutions for healthcare financing and access, potentially even suggesting a repeal of the Affordable Care Act.
Right? This proposal really highlights the classic liberal emphasis on individual responsibility and limited government intervention. So proponents of this approach believe that market forces can actually drive down healthcare costs and improve quality. They argue that a more market-driven system would give individuals greater choice and control over their healthcare decisions.
Okay, but wouldn't that leave some people, especially those with pre-existing conditions or lower incomes, struggling to afford healthcare?
That's a major concern raised by critics.
Yeah.
They argue that healthcare is a fundamental right, not a commodity, and that the government should play a role in ensuring access for all. They worry that a purely market-based system would create significant disparities in access to care.
So it boils down to a fundamental difference in philosophy, individual responsibility versus collective good.
Precisely. And it's a debate that reflects, broader societal values and priorities.
Okay, moving on to the sixth pillar, national security and defense. Project 2025 calls for strengthening military capabilities, bolstering border security, and countering global threats. Seems like a pretty straightforward approach.
It does. This is, a core function of any government, ensuring the safety and security of its citizens. Project 2025 takes a firm stance on this, emphasizing the need for a strong military and robust border control measures. It reflects a concern about global instability and a commitment to protecting national interests.
And, this pillar seems to resonate with the idea of national sovereignty, which has gained a lot of traction in recent political discourse.
Absolutely. Project 2025 echoes this sentiment, particularly in its approach to foreign policy. The seventh pillar, foreign policy, emphasizes national interests and sovereignty, potentially leading to a reevaluation of international agreements and a reduction in foreign aid.
That sounds like a significant shift away from the globalist perspective that has dominated foreign policy in recent decades.
It does. This approach suggests a more cautious and selective engagement with the world, prioritizing American interests above globalist agendas. It reflects a skepticism towards multilateral agreements and a belief that the U.S. should focus on its own security and prosperity first.
Okay. Now, the eighth pillar, judicial and legal reform, calls for adhering to the Constitution and potentially limiting the power of the courts. This seems to be a response to concerns about what some call judicial activism.
You're right. The concern here is that judges are overstepping their bounds and essentially making law from the bench, rather than strictly interpreting the Constitution, as originally intended. So Project 2025 reflects a desire for a more restrained judiciary, one that defers to the legislative branch and upholds the original intent of the Constitution.
So it's about reining in what they see as an overreach of judicial power.
Exactly. They advocate for judges who strictly adhere to the Constitution and avoid injecting their own personal beliefs or interpretations into legal decisions.
Now let's turn to social issues. Project 2025 highlights conservative viewpoints on family values, religious freedom, and freedom of speech. These are obviously very sensitive topics.
They are. This pillar reflects a strong emphasis on traditional values and individual liberties, often framed within a religious context. It's an area where cultural and political fault lines often emerge, with, differing views on the role of religion in public life, the definition of family, and the boundaries of free speech.
It's interesting how these social issues often become flashpoints in political debates, even though they're not directly related to economic policy or national security.
That's because they tap into deeply held beliefs and values about how society should be structured. and what principles should guide our moral compass.
Okay. Finally, we arrive at technology and innovation. Project 2025 focuses on fostering a favorable environment for technological advancement, while prioritizing national security and privacy. This seems like a tricky balancing act.
It is. On one hand, they want to encourage innovation and technological progress, which they see as crucial for economic growth and national competitiveness. But on the other hand, they're concerned about the potential risks associated with new technologies, such as cyber attacks, data breaches, and the erosion of privacy.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where innovation can flourish without compromising security and individual rights.
Exactly. It's a challenge that policymakers are grappling with worldwide. As technology advances at an unprecedented pace, Project 2025 recognizes this challenge and proposes a framework for navigating it. But the details of how to strike that balance remain open to debate.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, exploring the 10 pillars of Project 2025. It's a comprehensive document that offers a glimpse into a potential future for American politics and society.
It certainly does, and it raises many important questions about the direction we want our country to take and the values we want to prioritize.
We'll be back after the break to discuss some of these questions and explore the broader implications of Project 2025. You know, it's really striking how this document, it's like a mirror, reflecting different perspectives on the role of government and the values we hold dear as a society.
Yeah, it's not just a set of policy proposals. It's really a statement about the kind of America its proponents envision.
Right, and that's what makes it so thought-provoking. It challenges us to consider what kind of future we want for ourselves and for future generations.
Absolutely. And it highlights the importance of, informed civic engagement, understanding these proposals, their potential impact, the underlying philosophies. It's all crucial for participating in the democratic process.
So let's step back for a moment and consider the bigger picture here. If these policies were actually implemented, how might they reshape the American landscape?
Well, it's tough to predict with certainty, but we can explore some potential scenarios. For instance, if Project 2025's vision of limited government, deregulation, and free markets, if that was fully realized, we might see a significant shift in the balance of power between the government and the private sector.
And that would likely have a ripple effect across various sectors, right, from healthcare and education to energy and the environment.
Exactly. We might see a more dynamic and innovative economy, but potentially at the cost of, greater inequality and a less robust social safety net. It's a trade-off that societies have grappled with for centuries.
And what about the social and cultural implications? Project 2025 emphasizes traditional values and individual liberties, which could lead to a more conservative social climate.
Yeah, that's a distinct possibility. We might see changes in areas like education, family policy, religious freedom. And, it's important to consider how these changes might impact different groups within society and whether they would foster greater inclusivity or potentially exacerbate existing divisions.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Project 2025, what key takeaways would you leave our listeners with?
I think the most important takeaway is that the future isn't predetermined. It's shaped by the choices we make as individuals, as communities, as a nation. Project 2025 presents one vision for the future, but it's up to each of us to engage in thoughtful dialogue, weigh the potential costs and benefits, and ultimately decide what kind of future we want to create.
Well said. And that's the essence of what we try to do here on Phoenix Podcast. To provide you with the information and insights, you need to navigate the complex world of politics and economics.
We believe that knowledge is power, and that an informed citizenry is essential for a thriving democracy.
So we encourage you to continue exploring these ideas, to engage in, respectful conversations with those who hold different viewpoints, and to use your voice to shape the future you want to see.
As always, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and stay engaged.